Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first meeting of the Grey Highlands Lake Management Task Force. Today is Monday, March 25th, 2025. My name is Coordinator Thompson, and I will be facilitating as chair of today's meeting until such time that the task force elects a chair and a vice chair for the term of the task force. So I will call today's meeting to order at 1:03 p.m. The next item on today's agenda is the member introductions. So we'll each take a moment and the members will go around the table, introduce themselves briefly to the task force, starting with Member Wickens.
Good afternoon, everybody. Dan Wickens, Counselor for Grey Highlands.
Thank you. Member Dempster.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Morris Dempster. I'm a resident of Grey Highlands.
Thank you. Member Dubik.
Hi there, I'm Nadia Jubik. I'm a counselor with Grey Highlands Task Force, given the feedback that we're provided from the community.
Thank you, Member Dubik. Next to Member Shelson.
Hi there, I'm Ken Shelson, and I'm a cottage owner on Lake Eugenia.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Member Andrew.
Hi, my name is Barbara Andrew. Longtime property owner on Lake Eugenia, full-time here since 2015, and also vice president of the Lake Eugenia Property Owners Association.
Thank you, Member Andrew. Next, we'll go to Member McGowan.
That's a great title. I like it. My name is Janine McGowan. I'm an environmental scientist and I guess a resident of Eugenia since 2021, although I did grow up in Mayford.
Great. Thank you. And Member Lemoyne.
Hi, I'm Richard Lemoyne. We've owned a property on Bruce's Lake since 2005 and lived up here full-time since 2010. I'm also the president of the Brewster Lake Homeowners Association and also the lake steward. My wife and I take the water samples that are submitted to the ministry 6 times a year.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to introduce yourselves. Next, we'll move on to the next item on today's agenda, which is the election of the chair and the vice chair for the task force. So I will be facilitating the election on behalf of the task force. The process for the election shall be as follows. I will start with the position of chair. I will call 3 times for nominations. Each nomination shall require a seconder. The nominee is allowed to nominate him or herself. However, a seconder is still required. Once I have called 3 times for the position of chair, I will close nominations and verify that the nominees wish to let their name stand. If there is only one nominee, that person shall be acclaimed. If more than one nominee, a secret ballot vote shall commence, and I will then repeat the process for the position of vice chair. And when the election is complete, I will hand over the meeting to the newly elected or appointed chair for the remainder of today's meeting. Before we begin, does anyone have any questions? Seeing none, I will now declare that the floor is open for nominations for the position of chair. Do we have any nominations for the position of chair? Member Wickens?
Thank you. I'd like to nominate Member Dubik as chair.
Thank you, Member Wickens. Is there a seconder for that nomination? Member Andrew? Thank you. I'll call a second time for nominations for the position of chair. And I will call a third and final time for nominations for the position of chair. Seeing no further nominations, Member Dubik, do you wish to let your name stand?
I do.
Thank you, Member Dubik. So at this time, you have been acclaimed to the position of chair for the task force. Moving on to nominations for the position of vice chair. The floor is now open for nominations.
I will nominate Member McGowan because she has the environmental expertise to have some technical expertise on the executive.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that nomination? Member Wickens? Thank you. I'll call a second time for nominations for the position of vice chair. And I will call a third and final time for nominations for the position of vice chair. Seeing no further nominations, Member McGowan, do you wish to let your name stand?
And just to confirm, this would be for vice chair?
That's correct.
I suppose I'll agree to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Member McGowan. So at this time, you have been acclaimed to the position of vice chair for the term of the task force. That concludes item 3 on today's agenda and the elections. So I will pass the chair at this time to Chair Dubik for the remainder of the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you so much. And maybe just a little bit of clarification in terms of key responsibility of chair and vice chair from Member McGowan. You know, I think one of our primary responsibilities is to facilitate the discussion. So to take us through the agenda and to ensure that, you know, we're just ensuring that everybody's heard as we discussions. So moving on through our agenda, our next item is number 4. So that's the approval of the agenda. And the motion reads that the Lake Management Task Force approves the agenda as amended or circulated. So taking a look at the agenda, does anybody have any additions? The one thing that I think I may just add, and if this would be supported, is to add an item, other business, after the establishment of subcommittees and before we start talking about our meeting dates. So it's a bit of a catch-all at the end sort of our discussion, so that if we wanted to discuss anything else, maybe that we felt was missed, we do have that opportunity to do so. So would somebody like to support that change? Member Shelson and Member Andrew. So Member Shelson will say that you moved that, and Member Andrew seconded that. So if we can then have just a vote on that amendment, those that support that amendment. Perfect. So that's unanimous. And now we go to the main motion, so that we now accept the amended agenda. And those in support? Fantastic, that is carried. Thank you. So moving along is item number 5. So the declaration of pecuniary interest. So that just means if they feel they have a conflict of interest with anything on the agenda, this is the time to state it. Or, you know, as we do go through the agenda, if you feel that there is a conflict of interest, you can also just state it at that point in time. Is there anything that anybody has anything to declare at this point? Okay, so I see none. We'll continue on. Okay, so item number 6. So we're getting into the meat of our agenda here. So 6.1 is the terms of reference. So we have included, so there's a link in the attachment there that includes and outlines the terms of reference for the Lake Management Task Force. And there's the motion that the Lake Management Task Force receive the terms of reference for information. Could I have a mover for that? Member Lemoyne, and a seconder, Member Andrew. So the floor is now open for discussion. So this may be just a good opportunity for us to maybe just pause for a few minutes, and let's just talk about the terms of reference, so that we have an understanding of why we're here today. So if we do reference the mandate, so terms of reference mandate, so page 2 of 5. I'm not sure if everybody has had the opportunity to kind of to read through it, and you would have done so, I think, also when you applied, to become part of the committee. But just as a reminder, the key elements, are to review the current state of our lakes, to research best practices. So given the fact that, we're a task force, we have the opportunity to do sort of the work and the researching so that we can bring together recommendations, and then those recommendations can be put forward to council. We can investigate recommended strategies for lake mitigation, developing a lake management plan, and developing an education plan. I do want to just note that, as per our mandate here, we don't have funding in terms of dollars. So a lot of our research, may focus around best practices, bylaws that could be implemented, the education plan. And then if we feel, and as we continue to talk about, for example, scientific research, etc., if there's something where we need funding, that is something that as councillors, myself and Member Wickens, can take away to bring back to council. So the floor is open for just discussion about our mandate as a task force.
If I would like to ask the question, what does success look like?
That's for us to decide. So I think that, so very good question. But that's I think part of our opportunity to kind of scope out sort of what success looks like for us. As we move along in the agenda, we will come to a point where we'll talk about having subcommittees to do the work. And I would think that, one of our initial pieces of work would be to create a bit of create a stakeholder map. So identifying all the people and stakeholders involved with the lake in terms of management, associations, who owns what. And part of that then is also our roadmap of the work that we want to do and the scope of work, and what does success look like. So that will be a takeaway, I would say, for the subcommittee, so that we can then bring it back to this forum and then have a conversation around it. Member Andrew, she may be frozen. Oh, there we go. Member Andrew.
Sure, I was nodding my head. Yeah, that makes sense. That's fine. You answered my question. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Member McGowan?
So I just, already in my mind, I'm trying to categorize and strategize. So I believe we're talking about Eugenia, Townsend, Wilcox, and Irish Lake?
So it's Eugenia, Brewster, Wilcox, and Irish. So those are our 4 main lakes in our municipality. As we know, Eugenia is the one of, call it, greatest concern, because we're seeing the algae blooms. And so the thinking was, that, while there has been more conversation around Eugenia because there is more concern about Lake Eugenia at this point in time, as we develop best practices, right? So say as we think about, call it maybe like a fertilizer bylaw, or if we wanted to review our monitoring and communications, of our lake waters. That those best practices can also then be applied to the other lakes.
Yeah, agreed. It's almost like a triaging process where it's like kind of because like each lake probably has its own subset of certain demands and requirements. So I think, to be honest, like, and not to be a Debbie Downer, but as we all know, Eugenia Lake is actually private property. And to like, even when it comes to that, like there's going to be its own kind of level of requirements and actually dealing with OPG and even just incentivizing them as to like what they even care about doing. But not to forget about the other 3 lakes, obviously, but it is my personal opinion too that Lake Eugenia is suffering like the most.
Correct. And I think, in terms of the discussions I've heard like to date, I think that's fair to say that, that's it, Eugenia is a focus, but we don't want to forget about making sure we extend best practices to the other lakes. And of course, Lake Eugenia being a man-made lake is a very different, call it beast or an animal in terms of, how it lives and functions, versus the other lakes, which are natural lakes.
If I could suggest something that we kind of do sooner rather than later is perhaps have an information exchange from the people who on the specific lakes to the group to say, this is what we've been doing on our lake. Like I can speak to the meetings that I've attended with OPG and the studies that have been done and so on, specifically about Lake Eugenia. And I think we know a little bit about some of the other lakes, but not much. So I think an information exchange would be a useful starting point.
Fantastic. Thank you, Member Andrew. So great point. And as we move along into the next part of the agenda, that's a bit of that. That's part of that purpose. As what you're stating is, let's identify sort of what we know. We can have that cursory conversation today, but of course, there's going to be follow-up in terms of making sure we understand what is that current state, and that call it that fact base of everything that we know today. So thank you very much for that. Any other discussion around the mandate? Okay, so I see none, so we'll take that. Oh, Member Andrew?
To keep yammering, I mean, I keep looking at the mandate and it's large, it's broad, it's vague. And
we'll give her a few seconds. Sometimes it's, I appreciate connections can vary in our region. Hi, Member Andrew. We heard that the mandate is large and vague, and then we just lost you for a few seconds.
Yeah, I mean, I have high-speed internet, but I noticed weird things have been happening in the last 24 hours, so I apologize. Yeah, I just think Member McGowan mentioned prioritization, and I think that is key because I think we'll just we'll be adrift in vagueness.
Yes, point taken. And then so we can talk about that in terms of priorities, scope of work, roadmap, and prioritizing as part of our subcommittee work at the end of our discussion. Member Coordinator Thompson.
Thank you, Chair Dubik. Through you, I apologize, I didn't unmute myself. Before the committee moves on from the terms of reference, I did just want to bring up a brief note. The original formulation for the composition of this task force included a member from Grace Alba Conservation Authority, and I did just want to provide a bit of an update to the task force that at last week's council meeting, there was a motion passed by council to, instead of having the Grace Alba Conservation Authority as a member of the task force, instead they will be participating in the group as an advisory member, so an advisory capacity, not a voting member. There is a bylaw that does need to be passed by council in order to formalize that motion. But I just wanted to provide that update as it does affect the terms of reference for the group.
Thank you for that. And to provide a little bit of clarity, so the reason why Grace Alba will be acting as an advisor, not a member, is given the fact that this is a task force that does work. If given there's been changes to the Conservation Authority mandates where they can't do work beyond their very strict stated mandates as per policy, without having being paid for by the municipality. So they're very happy to come as an advisor and provide all because they do have a lot of information regarding Lake Eugenia and the other lakes within their watershed. There is one lake, I think it's Wilcox, that is part of the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, so we can always reach out to them if we need some information. However, Grace Alba is very willing to share the information that they have and historical information as well. Member Shelson.
Thank you. So just in terms of I guess this relates to the terms of reference, but I remember reading that there was to be one representative from each lake. Were we able to achieve that? Because I was hoping if we did have that, then they'd be able to provide more feedback as to, what are the needs and what's the status at each lake?
It's a great question. So we weren't able to achieve that. I think also just, kind of given where the state of the lakes are right now, more so interest with Lake Eugenia. Member Lemoyne, as stated, during our introduction, he's on Brewsters and very much involved with the Brewsters Association. He does the lake monitorings. And so I think we will be able to gain a lot of knowledge, and we have that key point of contact via Member Lemoyne. And the other two lakes we'll have to sort of figure out. Any further discussion? Okay, so as I see none, we'll just take this to a vote to accept the terms of reference for information. Those who support that, just raise your hand. All right, so that is carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, so moving along in our agenda, the next item is item 6.2. So this is local lake management efforts. So this is a discussion. So Member Andrew, so to your point about, having this information exchange about, let's identify who we know that is part of, in terms of stakeholders, part of, the management of our lakes, and the information that we do have in our current state. And so breaking it down, we can think about it in terms of our community. So that would be our cottage associations, the Friends of Lake Eugenia. They have been doing a lot of the scientific work and working with the engineers, to do a study of a portion, of Lake Eugenia and creating solutions. And they have been in touch with OPG. And then there's other various community groups, around the lake that around our lakes, that would, would be of interest of the management. We also have the municipality, or at a municipal level. So the municipality, does have some responsibilities, where council is looking at a septic reinspection program. It is on our agenda this week on Wednesday. So at a committee of the whole. So council will be discussing what a reinspection program for septics could look like for our municipality, so around our lakes and the municipality as a whole. There's conservation authorities, and then there's other agencies as well. Because we do have the health units who are part of the monitoring process. There's the ministries of environment and fisheries, that also do have certain responsibilities. And so let's put the motion on the floor, and then we can kind of further discuss this. That the Lake Management Task Force receive the local lake management efforts. Oh, it's the discussion. Okay, so we haven't finished the discussion. Let's just open up the conversation now and open up the floor for discussion. Member Andrew, I'm not sure if you wanted to speak a little bit more about any of the stakeholders or information that may be top of mind for you.
Sure, but I don't want to tell people stuff they already know. How well versed are people on the research and solution efforts that have been proposed at Lake Eugenia for blue-green algae in particular? Shall I go into the background? Yes, no?
And what we can do, and remember, Andrew, what we can also do is we can take the time today to do sort of a high cursory level of sort of what's going on. And then if we want to do a more deep dive, we can also, and this is always open, this is for our own discussion in terms of how the task force would like to move forward. We can also invite, the Friends, to do, to come and do a presentation to to our group as well. So just keeping those options open, but please take it away.
Be aware that the Friends and LAPOA are working in lockstep now. There was a time when that wasn't really the case, but it has been for quite some time. So just a high-level overview, blue-green algae in particular has been a real problem for years. There was a study done over 2 successive summers by some limnologists to ascertain the source of the problem. And it largely seems to be there is some coming in from outside sources, but the main source seemed to be 100 years worth of phosphorus being in the sediment and getting unlocked by anaerobic processes and then becoming available to the blue-green algae. The solution was proposed by the limnologist, which is to put some alum on a 6-hectare section of the main part of the lake, and that apparently locks in that phosphorus so it doesn't go anywhere. OPG is fine with the concept, providing that permitting is done by the MOE. We met with the MOE last fall, and they were theoretically fine so long as it was fine with the scientists. So the scientists have been chatting and more samples have been taken. They wouldn't give us a timeline on how long that process the approval process would take, but we were encouraged by the fact that they were open to discussion and open to spending time on it. So that's where it is now, and talking about fundraising and so on. The other piece you alluded to it is we'd like to see more attention paid to septics and the possibility of runoff there. And the other thing that was identified was salt runoff from the causeway, which could be dealt with by road management.
Thank you for that, Member Andrew. May I just ask a question? Are there any timelines for the scientist review?
No,
Okay,
I
thank you.
mean, we specifically asked in the meeting last October, November, how long will this take? And they conspicuously said, no answer. So it takes as long as it takes.
Okay, thank you for
But
that.
they had all, we were actually quite encouraged that they had, the MOE folks came to the meeting having looked at the material. They had a list of questions, and I know the scientists have been talking. So there seemed to be more action than just vagueness. So I was quite pleased about that. But as to how long, no idea.
Thank you very much for that update. Member McGowan?
Of course, this is a bit more where I have some strength and be able to contribute. Would there be any way, Member Andrew, for me to like be in communication or contact, just to kind of have more of like a historical understanding? Because you said that the past 2 years this data has been taken, right? Yeah. So
That's correct.
yeah, are they open to like sharing their data or their information?
So, so you live in Eugenia, but you're not on the lake. You're not part of the association.
No.
Okay, so because we have shared both reports with the property owners association who paid for it, but we can certainly talk offline about the data.
Okay.
There's quite a lot of it.
Yeah.
Yes, and thank you for that question. Because in terms of information, everybody here, I think, could have access to those 2 reports. I do believe they're on their website as well. And if you take a look at the our agenda, there was a attachment number 1 under 6.2 is a Friends of Lake Eugenia. That was a June presentation that was shared with, I think, with council. Oh yeah, and that's a very short presentation. That's just a few slides, but there are the 2 detailed reports.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't have, obviously, it's obvious that I didn't have enough time to read the document that was shared with us. There's just, you know, my mind's already reeling with, you know, what could be like direct correlations, but I'm wondering, like, because it seems to be like the state of the lake is actually genuinely getting worse, but does that correlate with, say, how much they drain the lake, thus like actually being able to release the phosphorus into the system as opposed to it being contained? So it's just like,
So. I don't think that's an issue.
I hope so. There are possibilities that can be taken into consideration with, you know, like bloom levels kind of peaking and then collapsing could be maybe lined up with like how much the lake gets drained. It was drained a lot, I would say even more so perhaps this year because of the snow load. I don't know. Anyway, I digress.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further discussion around just general conversation maybe that you're seeing? Member Shelson?
Okay, thank you again. Perhaps it might be beneficial if either in maybe subcommittee form or somewhere we could a subset of the committee could review. I mean, there is a lot of data in those 2 reports, but are there unanswered questions that are in there in terms of results? My feeling or my impression that I got from it was more the impact of rising temperatures more than outflows, because basically inflows at the end of the year equal the outflows. But could that be perhaps, you know, we would want to know exactly, like, would that be sort of agitating the you know, the lake bed, which causes phosphorus to be released? These are really technical questions, and I'm just speculating, but maybe we could go to those and again look at the solutions that are offered, and have there been any considerations like impact on fish and so forth of the alum solution.
We also had meetings with, well, back up, the driving force behind Friends of Lake Eugenia, Doug, is actually from Minnesota or Wisconsin, I forget which, but one of the two. And those states have done a lot of this kind of treatment and have been quite successful at it. And some months ago, we had a meeting with a gentleman from Alberta who does this kind of treatment, and then a scientist from Minnesota or Wisconsin who does it, a PhD in whatever, very knowledgeable fellow. And they have actual, like they've done hundreds of this alum treatment, and they have the science to back it up. There's lots of papers to link to. There's lots to delve through. But what was interesting is that they've actually done it, and they can answer all those kinds of questions about impact on whatever. In terms of the temperature, obviously that is a factor. And I think one of the biggest factor is the shorter ice cover over the winter, because those things just compound, because the shorter ice cover is going to lead to warmer temperatures for longer. My understanding of the actual chemistry of it all is that you get an anaerobic scenario down at the bottom layer of the lake, and you've got iron and you've got all sorts of things happening. And those chemical reactions facilitate the release of the phosphorus into the column of the lake. You can put bubblers in, which solves the anaerobic scenario, but that's not particularly practical or useful in the long run. You can dredge and take the phosphorus out, but that's also going to have huge impacts on fish and algal and so on. And the reports go through those various scenarios. And the interesting, and I'm as skeptical as anybody about why would we dump all this stuff into the lake, but I do take some part in the fact that this has been done a lot in the US, and there's a track record. But going back to the scenarios and the draining of the lake and so on and so forth, that obviously has an impact, but the largest root cause seems to be the accumulation of phosphorus in the sediment over 100 years.
So if I could just add something to the point that we're going to everybody's first names, because calling member Shelson just seems way too formal. Interesting comment about the temperature. So I have probably 30 years of data on the phosphorus levels on Brewster's Lake. Unfortunately, the ministry is at least 15 months behind. Like I still don't have the results from my 2024 tests. So 2023 is the latest that I had, and it was a big spike in the phosphorus levels in the lake with no change. Nothing else, no new buildings, nobody built on the lake, nothing was different. So I'm hoping to get I've asked the ministry for the 2024 data to see if that was a one-time spike, but it would kind of correlate with increasing temperatures that are also having a factor on it. Because up until that time, we had, under the ministry's concept, ideal levels of phosphorus in our lake have now moved from that very base level to some concern. So, and temperature seems to be the only difference there was in that time frame.
And then,
Yes. Go ahead, Member McGowan.
and then just to kind of drive that point kind of home a little bit further, that the deeper the Eugenia Lake actually gets to stay, the more kind of latent heat it can kind of like not hold on to. Like, so the deeper the body of water is, like the colder it can stay. And I think, to be honest, like levels do actually have, I think, a factor here.
Thank you for those comments. Member Wickens?
Thank you, Chair Dubik. Just had a question for Member Lemoyne. Do you take any temperature readings on Brewster's Lake? like from start of the season till the end? And
Yes,
just-
so we test the lake 6 times a year. So each of those tests, we do a 1 foot below the water surface test, and we transmit that information to the ministry as well. They don't report it back, and we haven't been smart enough to write it down. But I can tell you two things. The lake has been much warmer, but also to remember McGowan's point about lake depth. And our lake's quite a bit shallower. So we're down probably 4 feet from where we were 3 or 4 years ago. And percentage wise, that's like a 10% change in the deepest part of the lake in terms of the water temperature. So yes, we do take it. Yes, we report it. And I can confirm that it has been warmer.
Yeah.
And just an aside, I also sail in Georgian Bay, and last summer I was seeing out in the bay, my transducer is probably 3 feet below the water, seeing 73, 74 degree temperatures out in the middle of the bay. So all the waters are warmer.
Yeah, so warmer water takes longer to cool down, and I think that's seen in the ice cover in the bay, even with the colder winter. There wasn't very much ice cover at all. I mean, there was some, but I don't. Yeah. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you for that. So to Member Lemoyne's, point, if we can definitely go to first names. We are a task force. We don't have to be that formal. And so please feel free to call me Nadia. Okay, any further discussion? Member Andrew.
Yes, it's Barbara. Just on the lake levels, and again, I can only speak to Lake Eugenia. It is an artificial scenario in that it is an artificial lake. It's a reservoir, so the levels are always going to change. And one of the interesting things that I came away with at our meeting with OPG a few months ago is like, my family's owned this property since the late 60s, and there was always conversations about whether the dam would continue to operate, and then they needed to spend $1 million on upgrades, and would that happen, blah, blah, blah. So it's always been kind of vague in the back, really, was it still going to be a going concern? And what they just said a few months ago is absolutely. They now more than ever are committed to their sort of small hydro. And there is constantly water flowing over the flumes, generating like enough electricity for like 1,000 homes all the time, regardless of what time of year it is. So, they obviously like right now there's water coming just in the last week in front of, I'm at the south end, so it's never more than about 5 feet. And 2 weeks ago, it was 0 feet. The main part of the lake is 30 to 40 feet deep and at the highest point. So it is a very shallow lake. Temperatures are going to be very critical, but it's one of the things that we have to deal with because it's not going to change. And I don't think we really want OPG to walk away.
Thank you, Barbara. Any further discussion?
If I may, I can't seem to get my picture to come up, but I'm just worried about the alum dosage. I've dealt with alum for the last 25 to 30 years. It's highly corrosive, and the solids that are in front of the dam will absorb the alum. So, and the only way you can get rid of it then is to vacuum those solids out. I think the main problem that's affecting these lakes is all the tile drainage that's being installed, and all the liquid manure that's being spread is very high in nitrogen, ammonia, and phosphorus. Very high. And I do know of some places where you have to stay 100 meters back from water sources and wells. Well, it's not being adhered to. They're putting it right beside the rivers. I think that's a major problem.
Okay, thank you, Maurice. Barbara?
One of the reasons that the Friends of Lake Eugenia, with the support of a lot of people, wanted to do these studies, and we're talking, I don't know what the total, about $100,000 in total has been spent on this, was to find out what the cause was, rather than just guess and say, I think it's this, I think it's that. So we brought scientists in with no preconceived notions. And one of the things that they measured was the inflow and the outflow. And it's a while since I've read the report, but what I remember was there is no appreciable inflow of agricultural runoff into Lake Eugenia. That's not an issue. Could always be better. And that's why we talk about the septic a lot. But in terms of agricultural runoff, it's not a concern.
And what I'll add to that is Grace Obel also has some data. I think they only have 3 or 4 monitoring points throughout Lake Eugenia. It is from the, at the sort of the input, the output, and maybe 1 or 2 sort of in the middle. Now, of course, it's not a fulsome view, but that is some supporting information, that they can also supply.
And just there also seemed to be a little point of differentiation between the Hutchisons who did the study and Grace Obel about the effects of heavy rain runoff.
Mm-hmm.
There seemed to be kind of different points of view there.
Yes. Dan?
Thank you, Natty. I've heard those reports about the non-appreciable, but I wonder, like, those tests that they're taking are just a very small snapshot in time. I think I'm with Morris. The more you see a lot more of the liquid manure, you see a lot more of the tile drainage. I think it is personally. I just my thoughts, but I think it can be a huge additive to the phosphorus. I've seen Janine kind of nodding her head. I don't know whether she wants to, make any statements or whatever she would like, but like the farming has changed so drastically. It's the more of the, if you want to call them factory farms, and they're not stewards of the land anymore. Just get the manure out, and wherever it goes, and the different types of manure, it used to be solid manure, and the farmers, they'd lots of times they put it out in the spring and it'd get worked into the land, and it was sequestered there. Anyways, I think we've got lots of routes to go here. Anyways, I'll leave it at that.
Janine?
Just like strictly observational, and I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble or anything. I come from a farming community, pig farmers especially. And if you go like to basically where the causeway begins, on like the Eugenia side, there is a really large hog finishing barn, like less than a block or a concession away. And those finishing barns tend to have like slatted floors, in so much that just all the liquid manure is collected in the bottom and then sprayed on the subsequent fields around. And if you just go and look at that physical setup, the field is right next to that one-way street. Again, if you're headed, sorry, I don't know my directions right now, but if you're headed over the causeway away from Eugenia, and there's no like riparian buffer area at all. It's just like a row of houses, and then the lake starts. And depending on when the samples were taken by these scientists, like, was it right after manure was spread and then it actually rained? Like, because all of these factors, and like as a scientist, you have to be pretty nitpicky as to when samples are taken, and then all these other extraneous factors. So yeah, it's just like even just visually, you can see that there is going to be like an agricultural component here, no matter what the data is going to show or not. So there are other solutions that can be offered or suggested, even if it is just kind of like creating riparian buffers that is going to, no matter what, if the data is not showing it's making an impact, it's still going to make an impact.
Thank you for those comments, Janine. And just as a note, at council last week, given the fact that Grace Hobble has membership on this task force has changed from a member to an advisor, council did add another member slot, for this task force, asking for anybody from the agricultural community if they wish to join this committee. So that ask is out there. So we may gain one more active member. Dan.
Thanks, Natty. I have a question for Janine. What does riparian mean?
It means just kind of like along a river or like a waterway. So like the land that is next to a waterway or a river is what could be considered a riparian zone.
Yes, and these call it these best practices of riparian zones is very much promoted by conservation authorities. They're always promoting, trying to work with the farmers, to get those established. Those that have farms, by the waterways. Yeah, very good point. Thank you, Janine.
Yeah, and that's just, again, it's like where my brain is going, and I can do this all day, so I promise I won't. But the studies that were mentioned by Barbara about the certain lakes in the States that have actually used alum before, like I'm just going to ask, like, how old are these practices? Because any subsequent kind of effects, like, may or may not be visible until after 5 years.
I couldn't give you actual dates, but I think it's well beyond 5 years. I think we're talking 20, 30 years. There's quite a lot of literature on it.
Sorry about that. Any further discussion at this point?
If I may, there was I read it last week. There was just a study done for Lake Simcoe in the Aurelia area. They're having the same problems with the blue-green algae in Lake Simcoe, and they've been awarded a 1.2 million. They're going after the Holland Marsh Growers Association that have to redefine how they plant their crops and find other ways of fertilizing these crops. I'm just watching areas that are being tile drained, and they're all beside rivers and streams. And it's, yeah. I'm watching the guys apply this stuff. Like there's a big tank on Highway 10 between Dundalk and Flesherton, an in-ground tank where they put liquid manure. They're also dosing that with fertilizer. So they're mixing this liquid manure with fertilizer, and then it's being land applied. And it's usually a high nitrogen or high phosphorus fertilizer.
Thank you for that, Maurice. Dan? Sorry, Dan, you're on mute.
Sorry, half I got. Anyways, I believe that big tank in Highway 10, a lot of that comes from the Listec plant in Dundalk, just to be stored there, and then it goes out and onto the land after that. I can't say anything about the Madden fertilizer or anything, but I did some work on that property, and I was told it was for. So, anyways, yeah.
Thank you, Dan. Any further discussion? So if I can just maybe just do a bit of a recap here, I think we've had a very good initial conversation about some concerns that we're seeing, some of the reports, analysis that is being done, some actions that are being done. We've been talking about some stakeholders that are getting involved, with solutioning. And so I'll put it out as a bit of a question here, because I think the next piece will sort of talk about the subcommittees, because as we think about the work and our next steps to keep this moving along, we'll talk about our work in terms of the establishment of subcommittees. But I did also hear conversation about making sure that we do have all the reports that are currently available. So Barbara, maybe you can make sure that we have the correct reports from Friends of Lake Eugenia, and that conversation, so we can do a lot of the kind of the readings, the getting up to speeds, and the sharing of reports information. We can do that, we can do that exchange, and also kind of wondering if we would given the fact that there's so much conversation just even around the lake, the Friends of Lake Eugenia solutioning in their report, wondering if while we can take the reports and kind of read them on our own, and have sort of offline conversations, also wondering if we would want to invite them maybe at the next meeting so that we can have maybe a bit of a Q&A with them, with everybody sort of around the table here.
I wholeheartedly welcome that idea. I think the more people with all the fingers that are in all the different pies, like I think the more we know, the better.
Now,
Sorry,
did you have a repository to put documents?
That would be, I think
You're
that would
doing
be
it by
great.
email.
Yeah, I think forming some sort of a repository would be really great. And maybe, our subcommittees can kind of figure that out.
Oh, there's nothing that the municipality has?
Yeah, I think it would probably be easier if we do it offline, like away from the municipality, and just kind of maybe do our own repository. Unless Coordinator Thompson has a different view of that, I think that would probably be easiest for ourselves. Maybe we create like a Google Drive or something for kind of as a repository for our subcommittees, and then we can share. Coordinator Thompson.
Thank you, Chair Dubic, through you. I don't have a problem coordinating the receipt of those documents and the distribution if that's helpful to the committee. I can definitely, if members have those documents that they wish to share, they can certainly send them to myself. And then I can look after the distribution of those materials to the individual members.
Okay. Barbara?
I'm kind of allergic to email distribution. I think that if we set up a Google Doc or Google Drive or something like that, I'm happy to facilitate that. But just I get so much in the way of email. I get so much, and then you never know what the latest version is. I would much prefer to manage it in some kind of shared drive. But thank you for your offer. Sorry, Coordinator Thompson.
Okay, great. Thank you, Barbara. Richard, I thought I saw your hand.
And Dan.
Yeah, I
as
was
well.
just going to say I agree that it's best to have it somewhere because emails get lost in the latest version, and I'm particularly averse to Google Drive, so I'm quite happy to set something up in Microsoft Shared Drive, or I have website space that I can give people access to. Just a little. I have too many things coming to me in Google Drive, so I'm always going back to coordinators to say, "Can you reshare that with me? Because I can't find it anymore."
Dan, I noticed you put your hand up. Was that all right, or?
No, I'm fine now. My question got answered. I was just going to suggest that Danielle do some stuff, but anyways, that's fine.
Coordinator Thompson.
Through the chair to the committee, I believe that I could, utilizing the agenda software that circulates the information to all the members of the committee, I believe that I could coordinate the setting up of a location. I do think there's some value in keeping the information that's shared kind of in kind of the ownership of the municipality, just because it is a municipal task force that we have. So I do think that there is some value there in making sure that just as coordination for the meeting management for this group, that it can be housed on the municipal software. So I do think that there is some element. I understand the Google Drive concept, but I do think that there is something that can be set up that would allow the municipality to still have access and control over the distribution of the information. So I think I would prefer if it could be done in-house.
Okay, so that's
Members
great.
of
So
the- Members of the committee would have access to upload, edit, and download. Sorry to interrupt.
okay, great. So so that sounds like a good plan so that Coordinator Thompson can get us set up. And so maybe as a start, you know, if anybody has any documents, I guess they can feel free to send that over to Coordinator Thompson, and then she can start setting that up for ourselves. Thank you. And I apologize. I too
So we
seem to be
still
having
need
a
to
little freezing.
email. Still need to email to the coordinator. We can't just upload to the repository.
Coordinator Thompson, can you please provide us clarity? Can we do the like uploading, or does it have to go through you?
Thank you. Through you to the committee, I will have to hammer out the details. I don't have that information right off the top of my head, but I can follow up with some more information after today's meeting for sure.
Okay, thank you. So in the meantime, feel free to send it over to Coordinator Thompson until we get further information. Okay, so that's great. So we will create a repository. Coordinator Thompson, do we need to create motions like for this, or are we just get to not have to create motions for something like this, given we're sort of a task force?
Thank you, Chair Dubik, through you. No, at this point, I don't believe that we need to. This is kind of an administrative function for the group, and I don't believe that we need to move a motion for this particular item.
Okay. And then also a question for you, like if we do want to invite others to say come to our meetings, if for a presentation or more some conversation as we continue along, again, do we have to create motions for that, or can that be part of our agenda setting?
Thank you. Through you, I actually was just referring back to the terms of reference for the committee to kind of get some guidance on that process. So if the committee does wish to invite someone like the Friends of Lake Eugenia or someone else, that would require a resolution of the committee to make that request. So that would be the first step in setting the stage to have someone come to an upcoming meeting and present.
Okay, apologize. I'm seeming to have a bit of freezing challenges here. Could you just repeat that? So should we be putting a motion together?
Yes, through you, yes. The committee should move a motion if they wish to invite an external body or a group for a delegation or a presentation to the task force.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll just put this question out to the group. Would we like any other groups to come speak with us for our next meeting? Janine?
Maybe not like groups per se, but perhaps like once we get some more information, then we can invite groups in. We definitely don't want to like kind of waste their time. If they can kind of educate us first and then we can welcome them in after, I think would maybe be better, but that's just my opinion.
Great, thank you. Okay, so then any other comments? Okay, so I'm not seeing none. So why don't we move to the motion then, that the Lake Management Task Force receive the local lake management efforts discussion for information. May I have a mover and a seconder? Dan and Ken. Okay, so thank you very much for that conversation. And Coordinator Thompson.
My apologies, Chair Dubik. The task force will just need to vote to move on to the next item.
Thank you. Those in favor of that motion? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Okay, so we're moving along to the next item. So establishment of subcommittees. So as we've been having our discussions, I think there was a few elements, that it sounds like we need to kind of move forward on and do a little bit of work to get us up and going. One thing I think that I've heard is there's a lot of different groups that have a little kind of a piece of the pie when we talk about lake management. So there's the identification of all the stakeholders, the roles that they play, so we do know everybody that's involved. The second piece that I've heard is getting a sense of the scope of work, and call it like our roadmap in terms of what we sort of the scope of work what we want to put our efforts on, and what does success look like. So that sounds like another sort of piece of work. Any other sort of chunks of and I think once we're able to just scope out the work and talk about success, and then we can continue on sort of the work after that point. So the floor is open for discussion in terms of what you may think are the next steps, and then we can talk about maybe the subcommittees to make that happen. Dan?
I don't know, we divide and conquer. I think there's definitely three main parts to this blue-green algae thing. I think like fertilizing around the lake, like especially the cottages, keeping their lawns green, septic inspection, septic runoff, and I think agricultural runoff. I don't know if we could split them in two with the fertilizer issues, or anybody have any other thoughts as to how to go about this and how to split up duties? And
So one way we could do is first, kind of when we talk about scope of work, those elements can be included in that scope of work so that we start to chunk out the work efforts that we would want to concentrate on. And so, so part of that could be, understanding, fertilizer bylaws, agri best practices, et cetera. Barbara?
On the particular for the homeowners, fertilizer runoff and thing like that, I think a huge component of that is education. And it's actually a bit of a thankless task, because I know the association has been doing this kind of education for decades. Put plants at your water's edge. Don't put stones, but people do it anyway. Don't use the fertilizer and so on. And where I said it's a thankless task is that these kinds of admonitions and suggestions have been going out forever, but often people don't pick up on it until they're ready to. Like if I have, I get all the emails coming into the association, and quite often somebody will say, Like, you should tell people about this, that they shouldn't be fertilizing, because that particular individual it had just penetrated their consciousness, and had missed all that outgoing communication for years. So aside from complaining about it, I think that if we can, education has to be a piece of it, and it has to be ongoing forever, because people only pick up on it when they're ready to.
Very good. Yep. So education is definitely a big piece of this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara. Janine?
That was really well said, Barbara. Thank you, because I definitely doubly down agree. I'm just trying to wrap my head around too. So if I'm not mistaken, does OPG not own the first 2 meters of the waterfront?
They own the shoreline.
The shoreline. Is that at peak level, or like what's considered the shoreline?
No, the OPG owns the water. The ground under the lake. And as a property owner, you've got, it ends at a certain, there's pegs and whatever, and it doesn't matter where the water is. Outside of your property, that is OPG, and every property owner on Lake Eugenia signs an agreement with OPG every 5 years to say, yes, you can use this bit. However, the distinction is that water is not owned by OPG.
Okay. And again, just correct me because I don't know the parameters of all this, but if there's an agreement signed with OPG, when it comes to maybe protecting those 2 meters of waterfront, like maybe OPG could dictate that you cannot spray, that you actually need to let some reeds and grasses grow and not put rocks in, and basically to mostly just manage like the nutrient runoff that's actually happening right at the source. Because if only a couple or handful of people do that, it's not going to be effective. Like, everyone needs to do it or not in order to actually see some legit results. But we do actually have like an advantage of like the actual owner of the lake maybe dictating some of these parameters in order to then not only educate, but then make it a rule for the homeowners instead of optional.
It's a nice thought, but I don't think it's going to happen. OPG isn't going to dictate, but they could always be convinced to. But mostly when people are putting these rock shorelines, they're doing it on their own property. Where you get into the waters when you're doing a dock, and you have to get approval. You have to submit a plan to the Conservation Authority, and they will approve it. And providing they've approved it, then OPG will approve it. But OPG isn't going to spend a lot of time and definitely no money on making dictates about the shorefront.
And to that point, though, I do believe the municipality could pass call it a fertilizer bylaw. So beyond, call it that, that shoreline piece, the municipality could put a bylaw to say no fertilizers.
Yeah,
within
and
so
same
many
with
meters
septic
of water.
inspections. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And that is a best practice that we have seen like in other municipalities. Dan?
Thanks, Nadia. I think maybe one of the subcommittees maybe should be going out there and finding out about bylaws and what laws are actually out there, regarding all the fertilizer spreading and stuff like that, either municipally, federally, provincially, whatever. So we have some kind of a knowledge about that too.
Absolutely. And there are some very good examples out there already, like the Kawartha Lakes. They have very clear, lake analysis studies. And then they've developed lake management plans with a lot of best practices within them. So there's lots to reference in terms of, some best practices. For sure. Barbara? Oh, and sorry, then again.
So on the septic inspection, I understand Tiny Township has a very good program.
Yes, and that has been referenced in discussion as well. Thank you. Ken?
Thank you. I'm suggest perhaps if we were to break it down, because I think our goal should be to break it down by subcommittee, is have one as sort of residential / cottage, another one is like agricultural, and the third one is going to remediation / like studying the alum proposal in depth and sort of break it down that way. Do you think that would be a useful way to sort of attack this sort of multi-headed problem that we've got?
Yeah, so I mean, I can just speak to myself. Yeah, so I think definitely like there's like these different lenses or, kind of categories that we can definitely use to help kind of chunk things out and break it down for sure. Yes, thank you, Ken.
Admittedly, like, and this is not knocking the alums, but it's not really quite a solution if it is just kind of locking up the phosphorus. Like, what needs to actually probably happen is to address the source of this nutrient overload. And like, nothing's going to actually be solved unless we actually tackle the source of where all this phosphorus is coming from. And it's undoubtedly like from ag, it's undoubtedly from residents. And like the alum might catch us a little bit of a break, but it's still not really a solution, I don't think.
Barbara?
I think it comes down to a fundamental agreement as to what the source of the phosphorus is. Again, repeating, going back to one of the reasons we commissioned the study was to find that out. And what the study told us about Lake Eugenia was that the source of current blue-green algae is the sediment. And that got into the sediment from decades of agricultural runoff. Now, there's people on the committee are of the opinion that there is still agricultural runoff going on, and I think there's no magic bullet solution to any of this. So addressing that and measuring that again, I think is well worth the effort. However, the main thing that is driving blue-green algae in Lake Eugenia in the last few years is the sediment in the main part of the lake. So that's what the alum is designed to do, is to lock that up. You could go to the draconian scenario of scraping it out, which would be a permanent solution, but the price for that is very high. So you're right in that it is a bit of a Band-Aid, but the alternatives are not much, are now no better, in fact, are worse. And the inference seems to be is that the agricultural input is not that great. Now, of course, when you're talking about changing methods of fertilizing, that may change. And I don't think any of this is going to be a one-shot solution or a one-time solution. It's an ongoing process.
Okay, thank you for those comments. How would the committee like to proceed?
I lost you.
Hi there, I think I'm back. Okay, so just wondering how the task force would like to proceed. Because I think, having maybe a few folks coming together as a subcommittee to start to maybe lay out the scope of work. And then, part of that scope of work, would be using lenses of, how you would chunk out the pieces of work, so that could be from from an agri perspective, from the alum perspective, etc. But I think we do need to start putting things on paper to say, okay, here's sort of the work that propose a set of work based on the conversation we've been hearing today. Think a little bit about what does success look like, and also understanding who all our stakeholders are, because there are a lot of, fingers in the pie, as Janine has stated. So does that sound like a good next step if there is, a few folks who would come together as a subcommittee, to lay out some of this thinking so that we can start divvying up work, etc., as we move along. I think one of our takeaways, as members, as well as, as we build up our reservoir, of information that Coordinator Thompson will help us with. We do have readings to do, to get ourselves up to speed on what has been sort of done to date. But I will leave that open to the task force. Ken, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah. So to recap or reword what you're saying, Nadia, is that we're suggesting that we have a scope of use subcommittee, as it were, that will report back to the next official work task force meeting.
Correct. Yeah.
To be okay, I'm willing to serve on that.
Okay, so we have Ken. Is any? Oh, I see Coordinator Thompson to give us a hand on something.
Thank you, Chair Dubik, through you. I would just, I think the committee can certainly proceed and assigning members to a subcommittee. I just, before we, at some point, we'll just need to formalize that motion. And I just want to make sure that there's appropriate clarity provided to that task going to the subcommittee, but just my comment at this point.
Okay, thank you. So maybe it would be a subcommittee of, 2, 3, folks coming together to develop a scope of work, understanding maybe what, defining what success could look like, and understanding, and also bringing back a stakeholder map, so that we know who has what fingers in this pie and what their roles and responsibilities are. Like, so, ensuring that we understand, OPG, the municipality, the cottage associations, etc. Barbara?
So would this subcommittee then, through that, what you just outlined, in effect, identify if and what other subcommittees would be?
Absolutely. So I think this is like the first initial one. So it doesn't say like the subcommittee will have to continue on. I think the first task is just to let's scope out the work and let's break up all the buckets of work, so that we can agree on sort of what we as a task force want to work on. And what does that success, and that have that conversation, Barbara, as you had said, like, then what does success look like for us? But yeah, I think it's that initial scope of work of what are all the buckets that we want to work on. Because then once we do have all that scope of work, call it a roadmap, call it, buckets of key activities that we want to further investigate, etc. Then we can, I think, have 1, 2, 3 people on each element, so that we can sort of break up all the call it the legwork.
So
Barbara?
does it make sense for a subcommittee to basically identify what the whole committee is going to do, or should the whole committee decide that? I don't know how these things are done, so I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, so I think it would be good for, a few people, like, to keep this, to get traction on it. I think it's good for, a few people to take the lead on it, so that, they're sort of the owners to bring this back to this forum, and then we can have a conversation on it. It doesn't mean, so, and having, call it a lead subcommittee. I mean, they can reach out to the other members, of this task force. But I think we do need like, 2 or 3 people just to step away with the commitment to put this on paper, right? So we've had a really good discussion today, but what we need to do is to start putting this on paper so that we can kind of really understand how to break everything up. And so I think what the ask is, let's have a subcommittee that would take the lead to put it on paper. They can reach out to the other committee members here, but then to commit to bringing it back to the next meeting so that then we as a group can then talk about scope and success. So that is open for discussion. That's just, that's one way forward.
Yeah, I agree that that's a good way to move it forward. I unfortunately I still have a small practice of chartered accountant, so this is getting a little bit busy for me right now, and then I'm away for part of June, so I don't want to put my name forward on that particular project. But I do think 2 or 3 people from this committee working on the specific tasks will, do better than I call it the Hollywood Squares scenario we have right here.
Yeah, and we'll take it back to this Hollywood Squares, right?
Yeah.
To gain agreement. It's a very fun sort of anecdote there. Yeah, and I'll put my hand up as well to help with the subcommittee. So we do have Ken. I will sit on it. Barbara. So if that's a yes to join. Yeah. Okay. So we have 3 folks. So if the rest of the group is okay with that, as a motion, Ken, Barbara, and I will get together. We'll create, we'll draft up a scope of work. And then we may be in touch with you offline. But what we're committed to do is bringing it back to our next meeting so that we can then discuss as a full group to decide how we continue to move forward. Dan?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, Janine?
I mean, if it needs to be second, I'll do that. But I was going to say, if you're considering people to be on these subcommittees, my greater strengths would be either in the agriculture or the remediation using alum departments. I'm obviously not very knowledgeable about the residential or cottage situation there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Janine. Coordinator Thompson, is that enough guidance for a motion there? Fantastic. We got the heads up. All right. So it has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that next step? Okay, so I see none. So we'll take that to a vote. Those that are in favor, please raise your hand. All right. So that is carried unanimously. Fantastic. Okay, so we do have next steps. And I think this will position us well to get some traction to move forward. So thank you for that. So our next item would be the other business. So we did add just call it this is sort of a bit of a catchment of any other items or issues that you would like to discuss that we may not have captured during our discussion thus far. Any other comments, questions? Nope, I think, okay, so we're not saying none, so we'll just continue to move along and talk about meeting dates. So we did meet virtually today. I did just want to put out there that we also can meet in person if that is, a preference. And of course, meeting in person means everybody needs sort of, that, we need to be sort of, geographically close. to be able to meet in person. So I don't know if that kind of works for folks. But that is an option, if we wish to throw in maybe one meeting in person, if we wanted to get to know each other, kind of face to face, that is an option. But but when we do take a look at our meeting dates, we do have, there's two options. So the first one reads that the Lake Management Task Force schedule their 2025 regular meeting dates to take place bi-monthly at 1 p.m. on the fourth Monday of the month. So that would be May 26th, July 28th, September 22nd, November 24th, and that the Lake Management Task Force schedule the following meeting dates to take place in person, and that the remaining meeting dates be scheduled to take in virtual format. Okay, so that's one. So that's the one option. The second option is to take place at 5 p.m. So I think that's the only difference. Oh no, sorry. To take place at 5 p.m. on the Thursday of the month. Okay, so we have two options in front of us. If we wish to go with the Mondays at 1 p.m. or Thursdays at 5 p.m. Did I get that right, Coordinator Thompson?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Dubik. Yes, so the two sets of meeting listings there do offer some different times. I think ideally if the committee wanted to keep their meeting times at the same kind of date within the month and the time, that's ideal. But there's nothing to say that they couldn't kind of pull from each list and have some during the day and some in the evening if that's at the will of the committee. And just to provide some clarity, Council has approved for task forces to have up to 2 meeting dates per year occur in person. So just to provide a little bit of clarity there.
Okay, thank you for that.
Well, I think we had an issue that we had at least one member who couldn't attend during the day. Was it one person or was there more than one?
Okay, so Janine just raised her hand. So Janine, you're not good during the day?
Okay. Today was an exception, but in the foreseeable future, I know for a fact that I probably will not have availability on afternoons.
Okay. So the Thursday 5 p.m.s work?
For me, I could make that work a lot easier, but I know that there are other members, so.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, how is Thursday 5 p.m. for folks? Okay, and Maurice?
It's good with me. I work till 4 on Thursdays, but I could probably be home in time for a meeting at 5.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so maybe then, Ken?
Sorry, I just noticed there's no meeting scheduled for June.
That's right, because
They're bi-monthly.
yeah, they're bi-monthly. So
Bi-monthly.
May, June,
Sorry.
July. Yeah, so they're bi-monthly. So we're good. Okay, so would somebody like to move forward then the Thursday 5 p.m.? So Janine, I'll say that you're moving that forward. Thank you. And Richard, you're seconding.
I will second.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll take that to a vote. Oh, actually, one more piece. Sorry. Do we want to meet in person, or do we at any point, or should we just keep it virtual for now?
I think it would be nice to meet at some point in person.
I think in person would be great for some of the meetings. Speaking personally, the May dates, I'll be out of the country, but I'll be available virtually.
Okay, thank you. Is there maybe would July 31st work in person for folks?
That's okay for me.
So why don't we leave July 31st in person for now? When we meet on May 29th, if we think that's going to cause a real challenge, we can address it at that point. But that'll give us at least one meeting where we can be face to face. Okay, so we'll move July 31st as in person and the others virtual. Okay, so we'll take that to a vote. Those in favor? Okay, that is carried unanimously. Thank you so much. All right, so our next meeting is Thursday, May 29th at 5 p.m. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming out on our first meeting. I think we've, I think we do have some clear kind of marching orders to get some traction and move ahead. And a big thank you for taking the time out of your personal lives to dedicate to this effort. So thank you to everybody. So the last item is just to adjourn. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Richard and Maurice? Perfect. Okay, so those in favor to adjourn? Okay, and we are done. Everybody, thank you so much. And Barbara and Ken will be in touch, and then we can get ourselves coordinated as a subcommittee.